For more on the future of farming, let's bring in Timothy Shelford. He's a research associate at Cornell University in New York. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rachelle.
So with urbanization growing globally, do you expect more vertical farms to pop up in the coming years?
I do. I think particularly in more affluent areas of the world, Europe, North America, and also the Middle East, I think, is probably where most of them will occur.
So what do you see as the biggest economic and environmental benefits that come with vertical farming?
So I should say that I'm not really a proponent of vertical farms. I think that greenhouses, which is basically a single level, taking advantage of the sun, are most likely more energy efficient in terms of producing the type of produce that is usually grown in vertical farms. But I do think that there is a place for them in some of the climate, such as the Middle East, where protected culture in vertical farms would be a better use of the environment, and it would be much cheaper than shipping in the produce from abroad.
Now, you raise an interesting point because a lot of people are asking, is the amount of energy needed to not just power it, but also irrigate these farms and set them up, is that worth the trade-off of, say, traditional farming, or as you mentioned, using a greenhouse?
Yes, so vertical farms can use between 2 to 4 times as much energy to produce the same amount of produce as a typical greenhouse. Many of the benefits that vertical farms tout, such as increased automation and supplemental lighting with LEDs, are also benefits that can be realized by greenhouse production as well.
Now, where do you see vertical farming being the most impactful, being that a lot of people don't have access to fresh foods, and not just because of perhaps the distance, but also things like climate change?
Yes, so I think in places such as the Middle East or northern regions where it's difficult to get fresh produce, I think that vertical farms do have a place there, and where maybe a traditional greenhouse wouldn't be as effective, and where trucking in produce is too energy intensive and the cost is too high.
Now, looking more broadly, we know that agriculture as an industry is the world's largest employer, and vertical farming requires a lot less manpower. So how do you think this is being received overall by farmers, especially as they think about jobs and job security?
Well, I guess it depends on the farmer. I mean, if they're an owner of an operation, of course, labor is their greatest expense, and any way they can reduce that cost, they would like to take advantage of. So again, it depends on what level of the farm you're operating at.
Now, what about urban planning? As we look to the future and the growing population and supporting them, how should urban planners be viewing this when they're thinking about mapping out some of these cities of the future?
I think urban planners are going to have to be aware of the large energy usage of vertical farms, and in terms of they call it like pollution shadows. You know, which way the prevailing winds blow, so that we can locate these structures and greenhouses out of the prevailing winds that carry the pollutants that are usually generated in cities.
So then, as you look ahead, how do you see the future of vertical farming developing? Is that something that's just going to be a trend, or do you see that as something that we might continue to see springing up?
I think we're always going to continue to see it springing up. I think it's an innovative tool, and I think there are certainly areas where vertical farms are the way to go in terms of production. I don't think it's a silver bullet that is going to work everywhere. But there's lots of neat innovation that they have in terms of automation, and it does get people excited about controlled environment agriculture and thinking about where their food comes from. And so I think, you know, even from that perspective, they're here to stay.
Now, there is this idea of them using this to work alongside farming and essentially not to get rid of farmers, because some crops, as he was mentioning, row crops like wheat just don't work. Are there any sort of alternative ways to grow plants like row crops, since vertical farming doesn't work for those?
I think in terms of the reason that sort of the staples don't work is that they ship well and they store well. And I think vertical farms, their strength is in producing food close to people, and so that's perishable products that can't really be shipped. And so I think they mentioned it's mostly leafy greens and looking into berries and other crops that you can harvest, just as soon as they're ripe, and so you get a benefit of the better flavor. But I think in terms of the staples, like if you can store it and if they handle shipping well, there's not really, I think there's improvements can be made in the way that they're produced, but controlled environment agriculture is not likely one of the techniques.
Timothy Shelford, Research Associate at Cornell University. Thanks so much.